to our first day with Adobe Dimension. So today's going to be really fun. I'll show you guys how easy it is to import 3D models into Dimension, how quickly and easily we can apply textures and shaders onto the model, and use a physically based realistic lighting images in Dimension to light our models. And then I'll show you guys how to render it out, save it as PSD Photoshop file. And in Photoshop, I'll show you guys very simple tricks that I use to improve the final rendering of the image, and then we can save it out to be used for our portfolio and for presentation. Also remember to check out the Pinterest boards that I've included. I use Pinterest a lot to observe sort of real world, sculptures and how the shadows and lights affect the overall forms and shapes. So this is very important for artists to, do a bit of research and just look at how lighting affects the overall mood and feel of the sculpture, and also to look at, how contrast, like the shadows, can carve out, the overall silhouette of this sculpture. So the first thing I need you guys to do is to look at the downloaded folders. And in day one, this is going to be the project files that we're going to use for the class. So if you open up the project files and if you look at 3D model, this OBJ file or this 3D file is going to be JSON. So we're going to use that model for our class. And if you want to find out more about JSON, you can double click on the link and it will bring you to the description of the sculpture, the scan, and you can download the 3D printable file here as well. In the 3D renders PSD folder, you can see a Photoshop file and a PNG file. So the Photoshop file consists of the different layers of work they have done, and you can open up and check it out as well. And if you look at the 3D models folder, what I did was I downloaded a number of different scans from 3D Scan Store, and I reduced the polygon count. So for example, if you like to use Angel, you can open up the folder, and I reduced from over 2 million over polygons, which is a huge file, to 180,000 polygons and converted to OBJ, so you can easily use it in Dimension, right? And again, if you want to find out more about the model, you can click on the link and it'll bring you to the 3D Scan Store, and the whole description is right here. But if you download from the 3D Scan Store, it's going to be over 2 million polygons, which is a lot of data, which is great, but really heavy for 3D application. So the first thing, when you open up Dimension, you'll be introduced to the interface. So the reason why I like Dimension is because it is so easy to use. And what I want you guys to do is to import the model, right? That's the first thing we want to do. So there's two ways to do it. Is to go to File, Import, and you can import a 3D model or image as a background, right? So I'm going to import a 3D model and then navigate to the folder of day one, lighting a Roman sculpture. And what I'm going to do is go to 3D model and import JSON 180K OBJ file. The first thing you see when the model is imported, it is super huge, right? So it looks pretty weird. So what we're going to do is to first, on the top right corner, this is the real-time preview of the final render. I want you to turn it off, right? Because when you turn it off, it's easier for the computer to render, right? You won't see like the final preview rendered. And the second thing I want you guys to do is to press F to frame, right? If you press F, you frame the whole model, and that way it looks, now it looks right, right? So the second thing what I want you guys to do is to practice navigation in 3D. The first thing is selection. How do we select the model? On the left corner, you can see this little arrow key like Photoshop. And again, just like Photoshop, short keys are very similar. It's V. So if I press V, I go to a selection tool, right? And what I want to do next is to rotate it to a 90-degree standing angle. I can just click on this rotation bar. And if I press Shift, it will snap to grid, right? If you press Shift, right? So it's pretty cool. The second trick that's really cool would be, what if I wanted to sit on the ground? So, because right now it's like in the ground. So what I need to do is on the right, there is this tab go snap to ground or move to ground, right? So if I click on it, boom, right? So automatically it will snap to ground, and then I'll press F to frame it, and now it looks more proper. So that's the first step, right? So again, if you look at the navigation, rotation right here, you can move up and down, right? You can also scale it. Okay, so just by pressing V, if you want to undo it, just Ctrl Z, you'll go back to the original position. The next step, what I want you guys to do is to create a platform, like a little platform down at the box here. So what I'm going to do is to go to my shape, basic shapes tab, and grab the box. And you can see now I can place it on the ground, right? And I can also use it to, the navigation tool to scale it or to move it and enlarge it, right? So what I'm going to do now is to move this model up and place this box beneath it. Okay. The second thing what I want you guys to do is to learn how to navigate around 3D space. So if I press 1, right, I can see now I can rotate around the scene. Press 2, I can pan around, and then press 3, I can dolly zoom in and out, right? So that's pretty cool. And again, if you want to use the tools on the left, right here. So all you need to do is to remember V to select the model, and then 1 to rotate around the model, 2 to pan, and 3 to zoom in and out. So as easy as that. Okay. If you want more options, you can click, say, on the navigation tool, and you can see there's different ways to dolly around the model, or the scene. But don't worry about that for now. Okay. So what I'm going to do is to set this box to align with the sculptures. It's really hard to visualize it in 3D, right? So what I'm going to do is to go to the top view, but there's no options here. So what you need to do is go to camera, and then camera view. You can see there's top view, right? So you can click top, and then what I can do is press V because I want to select the box, but now it's hard to select the box. On the right top corner, you can see this scene tab. So this scene tab is like layers in Photoshop. This consists of the different items, objects that are in the scene. So I'm going to select the cube. Okay, you can see now the cube is here, and I'm just going to move it. And what I'm going to do is to enlarge it, right? But you can see it's really hard to enlarge it this way, right? So very easy. You can just press S, right? You can see now when you press S, you can literally see the scale tool, right? S for scale, right? And if you want to move, you can press E, right? So it's on the keyboard. If you check out the keyboard, S, bottom of E, press E, now you can move, all right? And you press R, you can rotate as well, okay? So SER will be the shortcut to navigate around there as well. And if I want to go back to a perspective view, I can go to my camera, view, and you can see now, I can go to my front view, for example. If I press 1, now I can rotate. Okay, all right. If I press F, I can frame on the selector model. If I go back to, say, the sculpture, now I'm going to rename it, double click on it, right, and press F, and now it's framed this way. So it's easier this way. Press V, and I'm going to align it to sit on the box. So the next step, I want you guys to learn how to set up the canvas size. So for now, I want it to be portrait, right? So how do I do that? Press V, right? And then go to the top left-hand corner of the canvas, and you can see the pixels description. Double click on it. And on the right bottom corner, you can see now the properties tab for the canvas can be changed here, right? So for the width, I want it to be, say, 500. And then for the height, 1000, right? So double the width. Cool. So now it's portrait mode. And the second thing what I want to do is for resolution, 72 dpi is great for screen-based renders. But if I want to print it, I would need at least a 300 dots per inch or dpi resolution, right? So I will change that as well in case I want to print it out. And then what I'm going to do next is to press my space bar, I can navigate around the canvas. If I want to frame it to my screen size, I can go to fit canvas and do a snap. So that's pretty easy as well. Okay, so now I like the portrait mode. What I'm going to do next is to frame up the model, to pose it, right? So what I'm going to do is press 1, rotate it around, press 2, pan it around, and press 3, I can dolly zoom in. Okay, all right. So one thing, when you dolly zoom in, you can see that there's a bit of distortion. I wouldn't say distortion, but it's quite a big wide angle. So you see the perspective is quite huge, right? So how do you change that? So it's very easy. On your right, if you look at the scene tab and in camera settings, there is a tab called field of view, right? So think of field of view as if you increase the number, it becomes like a super wide angle lens, right? So if I press 3 and zoom in, you can see it's super exaggerated, right? Right, you might like the effects, but for now, I want it to be more so like a zoom lens, like, so it doesn't have the parallax distortion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change from 109 to say 10. All right, just reduce it. And then press F to frame it. All right, so before I frame it, I need to select my sculpture, press F. See, now it doesn't look that wide angle, right? The lenses, it looks more like a zoom lens. So I like that effect. Okay, so I'm going to press 2, move it around. So from now, what I'm going to do is just subtly find a pose that I like, right? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose it this way. Yeah, okay, and again, if you want to find inspiration for posing and how to align a model, check out the Pinterest board. There are a lot of really good references in there. The next step, what I want you guys to do is to go to the Assets tab, right? So the first one is consists of models that you can import. The second one is really cool. It consists of materials and shaders and embedded textures that you can apply to your model. And super easy in Dimension. It's all just drag and drop. So I want you guys to have a play with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to Substance Materials and choose a marble material. So what I'm going to do now is to just drag and drop onto my model. I'm going to apply it to the base stand as well, so it looks like they're part of entire sculpt. So right now you might think, oh, it doesn't really look super photoreal. What's happening? So the reason why, because this is just a preview mode. It is not really showing you the sort of final close result. So what we're going to do is to activate a real-time progressive rendering technology in Dimension. So on the top right corner, right, if you look at this button right here, you just click on it. Now you can see there's a bit of pixelation, but what it does is the computer is trying to do a real-time render of the scene or of the material. So that's why it looks a bit weird. But when you render it out, it won't be like that. So it's just trying to maximize the computing resources to give you a real-time visualization of the final result. So great. So what we're going to do next is to change the background color, right? Because I want the sculpture to pop. So how do I do that? On the top right-hand corner, I'm going to go back to the full scene, right? And you can see in camera settings, right? You can change the perspective view. But in environment, right? This is the one that's we're gonna focus quite a lot in this class. So environment view, you can see the background color right now is white. I would change it to black, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, and for environment light, this is the default lighting. So what I want you guys to do is to go on the left, go to the lighting tab, right? You can see there are two sort of groups of lights, right? The first one, directional light, sort of, it's more sort of like, if you have square light or sunlight or 3-point light, these are individual lights that, if you apply to it, then you can, have, different lighting scenarios or, different ways to light the model, right? So this is using sort of like spotlights or the lights, individual lights that's available here. Okay, but what we're going to do is to use studio lights. How do I do that? So in the environment lights tab, if you look at the images right here, so it's very interesting. So if you're new to lighting in 3D, these are called image-based lighting, meaning these are all 360 images of 32-bit data. I mean, there's a lot of information in there. So if, say for example, this is taken in an outdoor sunrise campsite scene. So if I drag it in there, you can see now the lighting has a big impact on the final look of the render. So even if the marble material is sort of like, not as saturated, but the lighting does have a big impact. So for example, if I'm in like a forest scene and I include it into my 3D scene, you can see now the environment has a full impact because of the global illumination, the skylight and the sunlight and the diffuse light from surrounding like trees, right? So this has a big impact on 3D lighting. So this is something which, if you're new to 3D, something that you need to be aware of, that lighting plays a very pivotal role in getting a good render out of a 3D scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the first one, because Studio Low Key Lights, right? You can double click on it, that's fine as well, right? And what it does is Studio Light, if you don't know what it is, if I double click on it on the right, under Environment Light, if you just click on the Studio Light image, you can see now that there are two sort of main lights, right? So this seems to be the key light because it's huge, and then this could be a backfill light, right? But it's low key, it is not as bright. If I use like a studio panels light or something really bright like this studio light scene, double click on it, you can see now it's super overexposed because it consists of so much lights, like illumination around the 360 photo, right? So again, this is what we call image-based lighting. Basically, the lights come from the images and then bounce off onto the model and reflected off the model as well, right? My favorite one, to be honest, would be the first one, the studio low key light, because it gave me a lot of room to play around with the key light, and it does give me a lot of good contrasted shadows to sculpt the model as well. So this is the reason why we're going to use the first one to dress up our lights and to use our lights to sculpt our models. So let's focus on the light for now. Now that we've used the studio light, low key light, on the top right hand corner, right in the environment tab, this controls the whole environment. So if I have a lot of lights in there, this controls the overall intensity and rotation, right? So we won't touch that for now. What we're going to do is to focus on the actual environment light, the low key light that we selected. Okay. So if you think it's too bright or too dark, you can play with intensity, right? So you can see now I can make it brighter, and now you can see the shadows not that dark, but you can see it's super overexposed here, right? So I'm gonna just keep it to 100. And the next thing what we're gonna do is to play with rotation. So instead of using default lighting directional lights or the lighting position, what we're gonna do is to rotate it so that what I'm going to do now is to show a bit of tricks. So if you put it right in the face, right, the main field of key light right in front of the face, I mean it's fine, but it looks very kind of flat, right? So what I usually like to do is to not look at the bright areas, but also look at the shadows, right? So if I rotate it just like off to the sculpture's right, you see now I can, so what I'm doing now is to look at the shadows, look at how the shadows can sculpt the model up and accentuate the curves, also to give it a very nice studio lighting look. Okay, so I'm liking what I see right here. I can see that the shadows here are really doing well, right? And the lights, the key lights is dressing up the nose. I can see the key light under the eyelid, and the cheekbones. I like it, right? So just by moving it just slightly, rotating it to minus 12 degrees, I can get this effect. So if you feel that your computer is slowing down, you can turn off the real-time preview, right? So it's gonna look, just like a preview model, but that way easier for you to play with the lights because it doesn't need that extra resources to render the final preview. Okay, so you can do that as well. I'm gonna turn it on because if it's fine on my computer. Oh, also one thing that's super cool. Remember, like this is a default light from the studio. But if you want to change the overall color, you can say, for example, you want to make it more warm, right? You can use the color tab here and change it as well, right? But I wouldn't do that, so I'm gonna keep it to the studio light. So what I'm gonna do is to tone down the studio light a little because I still feel it's pretty bright. So I'm just gonna just a little, just tone down a little. All right. And now I have an issue is now the shadows seems to be pretty dark, right? So what I'm gonna do is to introduce the directional lights. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So I'm gonna do is to use, say, the circle light and drag it in there. Yeah, but now we face a challenge. It looks really, really bright, too bright, right? What I want this light to be is to create like a rim light, right, around the curves of the sculpture. So what I'm gonna do is first thing to rename the light. So I'm gonna call it top rim. All right, so that way I know this light used to use as a rim light. The second thing what I want to do is to choose the position of the light. But before I do that, there's one trick that I want to show you guys is if we rotate this motor around or this camera around, we're gonna lose this position, right? So we're gonna lock it down. How do we do that? On the top right-hand corner, there is the camera tab, right? Camera bookmarks tab. If you click on it, what I'm gonna do is to hit the plus icon. And what it does, it will save my view, which is really important. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to press 1, rotate my model. Why am I doing that is because I want to show you a cool trick. I want the top rim to affect like the rim around the head or the shoulder, right? So how do we do that? I can't even see the light here, right? So if you click the top rim or the directional light that we just imported, if you go all the way down to parameters, there is an action tab. And you click on the selection tool, like the position tool, click on it. And what I can do now is I can choose a spot for the light to light. So for example, you say I want it to be around the direction to be around this corner, click on it. And if your model looks kind of weird this way, I'm gonna turn away the real-time rendering. And again, just put the light so I can see it easier. All right, cool. So now that I've changed the camera perspective, I want to go back to my position. So what I need to do is to go to the top right-hand corner and click on View 1. Boom, you snap back to our first position that we wanted. And what I need to do next is to click on Real-Time Preview Render. Okay, I'm still not liking the position of the light, but it's getting close. So how do I perfect it? Right, so now what we've done is we've selected the sort of the set position to light. And what I'm going to do next is to then play with the rotation, right? Because now with rotation, I can adjust where the light is shooting the light from, right? And also I can play with the height as well, right? So while doing this, I'm looking at the shadows, right? Make sure that it's not going to overpower the main field light. Okay, just very subtle. Okay, awesome. So now we have the main studio light as the main key light, and then the top rim, we've been using it to sort of accentuate the curves and the silhouette of our model, so it stands up against the background. I'm liking how the highlights is lighting up, the the weapon, and also very subtly, highlighting the scope of the cloth, right, while keeping the contrast and the shadows intact. So this way, when I look at it, it's not too um, bright, right? But still, I feel like this area here is a bit too much. So I'm gonna do is to reduce the intensity of my rim light. Because again, I'm very conscious about the main field. I do not want the rim light to steal the lamplight, right? I want the rim light to support the main light. So that's why it's very important for me to look at the model and the lighting and make sure that the attention still goes to the face, that the audience will not be over confused by the lights and the rim lights to support the overall model. So have a play between environment light and rim light. I can go to environment light and reduce the intensity. All right. So again, if it's darker, it means it's more contrasty. So the effect is very different from, say, if you make it super bright, and it might look correct, but it doesn't evoke certain feel. So I kind of like to have a more contrasty look to my render. Awesome. So I like how simple it is using environment light and just a top rim to light out the model. And what I'm going to do now is also look at the platform. So another good trick is when you look at 3D model, uh, if the vertices or the corners are really sharp, you can't really see reflections really well, right? If you see this reflects the highlights really well, but the highlight here is missing because there's not enough like catchment area to show off the highlights. So what I want to do is another trick that I want to show you guys. If you go to the cube model, right, and if you go all the way down, there's a tab called Bevel, right? I'm gonna check, yes, I want bevel, but now it's too rounded. I don't want that. So I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click, say, 0.2, which gives a little bit of bevel. If I can't see the effect, I'm gonna increase it maybe to 0.5. So now you can see subtly the highlights is appearing on the base model, this cube, right? Because there's a little bit of bevel in there, right? So this way, it looks more cohesive to the sculpture. So I like that. That's cool. And I like how the highlights is accentuating the shape of the sculpture. It doesn't look too computer generated, right? It actually looks like a real stone that's not too sharp. Great. So the next thing what I want to show you guys is to how easily it is to render out a final image to Photoshop and do a bit of adjustment tricks in post and render it out for our presentation. If you go up to the render tab, right, top left corner render, right, in the render tab itself, you can choose the view. So that's my current view that I want to render. And I can name it to say JSON view 1 and the quality. So what I'm going to do is set it to high, right? So, but if you want to preview how it will look, just remember you can choose low, but I'm going to choose high, okay? And you'll be offered a few options. So first, we want to render as a PSD or Photoshop file, right? And the Photoshop file itself, we can choose between 16 and 32 bits. I would suggest 16 bits. 32 is great with, like trillions of colors, but 16 bits is more than enough. It's really, really good color information channel for us to color grade in Photoshop. And where do you want to save it to? So you can save it to your desktop. And then what you need to do next is to click render. So when rendering is done, you can go to the lower right-hand corner and just open up Photoshop from here. When Photoshop opens up, you see a few additional layers, such as, for example, you can select the mask based on colors. But we're going to talk about a really good render output. It's called a depth information. This allows you to create like a Z depth where whatever is in focus will be clear and whatever is not in focus will be blurred out. So this is the depth information. I'll show you guys how to play with it. and you get a rendered image, but you also get a reduced noise rendered image, and that's really cool. I'll show you what it is. I'm going to zoom in to say a point here. And you can see the difference between a reduced noise render and one with the default rendered image, right? So Dimension has a good algorithm where it will reduce the noise for you using this render, right? So that's the main difference between the two. And what I want to do next is to bring back the color information back onto the highlights. So you can see right now the highlights pretty overexposed. And I'll show you a couple of tricks that's so easy to bring back the colors, right? So make sure that you're on the rendered image reduce layer, right? And click on the adjustment layers and go to selective color, right? So when you click on selective color, you'll be introduced to several colors to adjust the hues. But the first thing what we're going to do is go to the whites, right? And just go back to the adjustment parameters and go to the black adjustment tab. And you can see now when I adjust it, like increase the blacks, right? You can see now I can bring back color information that is missing if you don't have these parameters, right? I can go to cyan, magenta, and also adjust the hues of it as well. So that's a really cool adjustment trick that I always like to use. Okay, and you can also go to the blacks, right? So if you go look at the darker areas, right? And so again, I can bring back color information from the shadow areas, right? So again, this almost acts like a curve for levels if you used that before, but this gave me a lot of cool adjustment parameters, like I can adjust the hues, not just the shadows and the highlight, but I can control the hues as well, right? So that's a pretty cool trick. And if you go to neutrals, which is the midtones, you can adjust the overall colors of it. So you can, again, whether you want it to be more contrasty, go to the blacks, adjust the blacks, or to adjust the hues as well, right? So again, this little post tricks is very simple, but it does enhance the image a lot. So this is before adjustment and after adjustment, right? You can see there's a huge difference, but just using a simple selective color node, adjustment node, then you can apply your post grading tricks on it. Well, another step that I like to do to improve the final quality of the shadows and the highlights is to add in a curves adjustment node or layer, right? So what it does is on the top right hand corner, this will affect the highlights, okay? And the bottom right, bottom left will adjust the shadows, okay? So again, you can see from the levels here. So for example, if I increase the highlights, right? So I can make it brighter, okay? And if I want to crush the shadows or make it more contrasty, because if the shadow is too with less contrast, right, it looks really bland. So you want to introduce like to crush it more, right? It's almost like a little S curves, right? More highlights, darker shadows, and then you get this like contrasty result that looks, kind of it pops, right? The image pops more. Awesome, I like what we've done here. So the next step, which is really interesting, is to introduce depth of field, right? So for example, if I want to focus on the head area and a slight blur to the cloth, I can do that with this depth information. So I'll show you guys how to play around with it. So the first thing what I need guys to do is to collapse the layers. So usually my trick is this. I will select the base image with the adjustment layers, and I will create a group, right? Control G, or you can just click on this button right here, this folder button, right? And I'll call it raw, right? The reason is because I do not want to destroy any information from there. And then I can press Alt and just duplicate the same group layers, okay? But with these group layers, I'm gonna right click and merge the group, right? Because using a lens blur, I can't do it on multiple layers. I can only do it on one layer, right? So, and I'll call it, say, depth image. Okay, and that way, if anything goes wrong, you want to change anything, I still have got my raw layers to play around with. Awesome, so let's see how we can draw information from the depth channel. and apply the depth of field in Photoshop, right? So the first thing what you want to do is to activate the visibility of the depth channel, right? And the second thing what you want to do is to go to your exposure, right? Okay, and check this out. So what I need you guys to do is to go to gamma correction and go crush it all the way down. See, now when you crush all the way down, you can see the information there, right? The grayscale information. So the theory is in anything that's say of a contrasty color like white, for example, will be closer or further from the camera. So this grayscale information allows Photoshop to understand distance in Z depth, right, or the front and back. Okay, so so why do we have to crush it? There are a few reasons why. I will show you. So this is a really important technique and trick. So you can see the aliasing around the edges. So the issue with that is when you do depth of field with aliasing around it, you not look good, right? So by crushing it all the way down, right? What I'm doing is I'm trying to just focus on areas that will be blurred out. So the next thing what I want you guys to do is to go to channels and just pick any channel like a blue channel, right? And just right click on it and duplicate the channel and I call it depth. Okay, so now Photoshop understands that that channel will be used for the depth of field. And make sure you go back to RGB, go to layers, and disable the visibility of the depth channel. Okay, and I'm gonna go to my depth image, right? And go up to my filter, blur, and then lens blur. All right, so automatically Photoshop knows, okay, the depth channel will be used for the depth of field information. So the first thing what you need to do is to set a focal point. I'm going to choose the face, okay? And if I increase the radius of the effect, so like say 30, right, you can see now it's really blurry. So this increases the effects of the depth of field. If you don't want it, just click 0 and then everything will be back to normal. All right, so again, radius is the tab of the parameters that you can use to play with the effects. So I'm going to choose 10. I'm not going to make it brighter. I can do it in post. I'm going to make it more accurate, and that's it. So once it's done, just click OK. All right, gonna back out, and now you can see the effects on Photoshop itself, and it looks really good, right? So on the depth image. But if you have anything you want to change, you still have got the raw layers, right? So that's why I created this folder, because in case anything goes wrong, we still have a raw layer to play with, all right? But this will be our end results that that we want. There's one additional trick that you guys might want to have a shot at, which is if you look at the image itself, overall it looks really good, but the bottom here, it looks really bright. So it's kind of stealing the focal point from the sculpture. So what I'm gonna do is do a simple trick using exposure. So make sure you click on the depth image and then go to exposure, right, adjustment layer, okay? And from here, you can play with, adjustment of the exposure, but now it's gonna affect the whole image. That's fine, right? But just want to show you what you can do. Just to tone down the exposure a little, okay? Just focus on here. So how do we affect just at the bottom, say right corner of the sculpt, right? So what I'm gonna do is to zoom a little bit more, okay? And focus on the mask area. That's why I like to use adjustment layers, because they're not destructive, right? So on the mask layer itself, okay, I will select it and then go to the gradient tool, right? Gradient tool has got a black and white gradient, right? Anything that's white will reveal the exposure. Anything that's black is kind of an eraser, right? So what I'm going to do is to make sure you click on not the image itself, but on the mask itself, and then choose the gradient. And I'm just going to do like a shot like that. So now if I draw this way, you can see that the sculpture is getting darker because the wider area is on top, at the top. So I'm going to do a reverse. All right, so you can see now the effect is very subtle, right? At the same time, you can control it using adjustment layer. So I like it a lot. And you can go back to the parameters and just play with exposure. And now you can see it's only affecting the bottom area, but it's not too drastic. It's very subtle. And that's what I like about it. In fact, by reducing the exposure, you can see now I'm drawing back a lot of details into the highlights as well. All right, so this little simple trick can enhance your image a lot and make it polished for final presentation. So I like what I see here, right? So what we've done is we created a depth channel and applied to our model. We used a few tricks like selective colors and curves to polish out the shadows and highlights, and then finally do an exposure adjustment just to balance out the whole image. So I like what I see, and what I'm going to do is to save it out as as a PSD, right? So save as PSD. And if you want to save an image, just go to Save As. And a lot of question I have is, what do you want to save the preferred method? So I would always recommend PNG, all right, because PNG it has a lossless compression better than JPEG, and it holds out contrast the images and pixel resolutions better when you open and closing the image. So when you choose to save as a image, I would definitely recommend PNG. Yes, thank you very much for your time today. I clearly have a lot of fun working with you guys to explain my workflow. I'm using Dimension to like a sculpture very quickly and photorealistically. So remember to check out the Pinterest boards as well. Observe how sculptures in the real world behave with lights, and observe how lights can affect the shadows and the highlights, and where you can place key lights, and how the overall lighting can have a big impact on the emotional feel and visual feel of the final model. So thank you very much for today, and I look forward to having you guys for day 2 of practice with Adobe Dimension.